Good evening, everyone, and welcome as we're all trickling in. For those of you who are guests, I'm Cantor David Mintz. I'm director of the Center for Prayer and Spirituality here at B'nai Jeshurun, and it's my privilege tonight to welcome back Rabbi Dara Frimmer for tonight's session of Torah for Our Time, a new adult learning series taught by a guest faculty of alumni of the Marshall T. Meyer Rabbinic Fellowship here at B'nai Jeshurun. It's really an extraordinary opportunity to explore some of the most pressing questions of our time while learning with some familiar faces for us at BJ who are now extraordinary rabbis and leaders of the North American Jewish life. And for tonight's learning, it really is a privilege to welcome Rabbi Dara Frimmer, who is a Marshall T. Meyer Rabbinic Fellow from 2005 to 2007, and now serves as the senior rabbi of Temple Isaiah in Los Angeles. Since joining the Temple Isaiah community in 2007 as assistant rabbi, she's engaged there in every aspect of congregational life with a focus on social justice issues, Israel, and religious education. She's active with many local organizations committed to social justice, including HAWS and the ARC, 1LA IAF, and the RAC, California. She's received a BA from Stanford University and a master's in theological studies from Harvard Divinity School. Again, Dara, it's just a pleasure to have you here with us this evening.
Thank you, Dave. That was awesome. And in my spare time, I run a synagogue. It's great to see everyone, and it's great to be back. I was saying to someone today that I do very few things outside of Temple Isaiah since the pandemic started, because there's been so much need just to focus on the community here. But when Felicia and others said, "Oh, we're doing this reunion of teachers," I was like, "Oh yeah, I'll do it." So it really speaks to my enduring love for the community of BJ. And how often I still talk about it and reference it. So I'm sending a lot of love to all of you. And if any of my congregants are hiding in all the squares I can't see, hello to Temple Isaiah members. I think a few of them, Dave, I'm pretty sure, did not get the East Coast, West Coast time switch. So it's okay, they'll watch the video later. Here's what I wanted to do this evening. I first wanted to just notice and be aware that because of social media, I was able to see the very sad announcement about Howard Goldman's death. May his memory be a blessing. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that he was part of the BJ team when I was there, and many of you may be impacted by this, and I'm sure so many other losses over the last almost 2 years. So we'll dedicate this teaching to him and to his memory and wish his family strength. And the second is we're coming in from so many different places and spaces. And my goal is to make it interactive. And I think with Dave's help, he'll maybe see hands faster than I will. But I wanted to just begin with a brief, why am I talking about personal choice? And I think when I gave this title 3 months ago, I thought it was funny at the time, but I'll go back over why I named it that. And then jump into this conversation, which I think is relevant, hopefully for all of us. I was a BJ Fellow in 2005. I was studying at the time at Hebrew Union College, the Reform movement. So I was a Reform future rabbi, having grown up conservative, but actively not having chosen the conservative movement to get ordained. Found myself at B'nai Jeshurun, so happy to be in what we were calling, you may still call it this, a post-denominational community. And really struggling with, well, what binds us together? Who are we? And in what ways could I convince Rolly, Marcello, and Ari to do the Debbie Friedman version of Oseh Shalom when they said, absolutely not, that is a Reform movement song, we do not do that melody. And all of the ways we laughed and joked, but ultimately struggled with who are we as the members of B'nai Jeshurun and who are we as a Jewish people? And then fast forward, I landed a job in Los Angeles, which many of you told me not to take because Los Angeles, God forbid, you should end up in that wasteland, no intellectualism. I remember all of you were like, please, what are you doing? You'll be out of there in 2 years. 15 years later, it turns out the weather is very nice here, people. I am in the midst of a vibrant, thank God, Reform community. But for those of you who don't have a close connection to any Reform communities, let me just describe what Isaiah is like. We have 750 families. Out of those 750, easily 200 of them are interfaith couples, some who have converted, but that means they did not grow up with Judaism and a strong basis of Jewish identity from which to choose from. They were learning it later in life. We have, interestingly, in our very large dynamic preschool, 100 Persian Jewish families who have chosen us, not because we are Reform, but because we are the best preschool on the West Side and bring a very traditional approach to religion and to practice and to expectation of what a synagogue should mean and could mean as they raise their children with us. We have couples who came from traditional and non-traditional backgrounds, and Reform movement was their settling place, like the compromise they made. And all of what BJ still has, preschool, K-12, empty nesters, and everyone in between. So I am constantly wrestling still with the question of, in a non-traditional, non-homogenous community, which we call Reform, but I would also considerably call non-Orthodox, what connects us, what binds us, what holds us together, what practices or beliefs can we all agree to? And personal choice or informed choice or the permission that certainly the Reform movement has given, but I'm going to maybe stretch it and say maybe any non-Orthodox community has given, personal choice to say, look, you should at least be aware of what the tradition is doing. Will I check up on your studies? No, but in your awareness of what the Reform movement or the tradition says, what do you want to choose to do? And that is a very different framework than saying, this is what we do. And if you want to join our community, here is the threshold that you need to reach in order to participate. And why I want to bring this to all of us today is I think it is still a very relevant question. As we worry about, as a nation, what connects us all, and what does personal choice mean as we want to articulate what we want and how we want to do things, and yet we are supposed to be part of a bigger collective, what might our Jewish experience teach us about how to live as Americans? And also, what might we be able to refresh for ourselves around our own willingness both to engage with choice and also with the larger calling to be part of something bigger than ourselves. So that's sort of the premise for how I got to this title, which is personal choice essentially a very seductive motto that hides out for, like, I don't really want to do that much. We sometimes get that at our community, like, oh, we're joining the Reform movement, Rabbi, because we don't really do that much. It's like, well, there are actually better taglines for us than that. But the other is this actually a human-centered design solution to modern Judaism? Do we need to start with where the people are at and allow them to tell us how Judaism best fits into their lives for us to ensure that down the road there is Jewish continuity, sustainability, dynamism, vibrancy, creativity? And how do we balance between those two? So let me start with just a question about valence and about intonation. When you hear the term personal choice as it relates to Judaism, does it have a positive or negative connotation for you? You can use it in whatever way you want to, but again, when you think about personal choice being the invitation for you to choose how you or your loved ones or your neighbors or your fellow congregants practice Judaism, does it lift up on personal choice, best thing ever, so glad we brought it up, or very problematic, possibly gonna minimize our ability to do what we want to do together? Quick reactions, just to get some voices from the community. And I guess, Dave, do people raise their hand, virtual or actual? What's the best practice?
I think it depends on what you prefer. People could write comments in the chat if you want to hear folks' voices. I think people can unmute, but it's up to you.
Yeah, either way, if people want to. Yep, I see a couple of chats coming up. Anyone want to share their voice? Marlene, you have a thumbs up. I like that. Good use. Excellent. All right, Karen.
Yeah, I really like it, and I wrote that in the chat. But it's because as our son, even though we've raised our son in a very Jewish home, to Jewish parents, and you never know what direction your kids are really going to go in, or how they're going to develop, or what they need or want. And so being open to, let's see what we can do. as opposed to, no, if you don't do 1, 2, and 3, you can't come here. And I just, that I would rather have him be part than say, I'm not doing that, so I guess I'm not going to be there. Yeah, so.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I hear in your story too, especially when it's so deeply personal to a family member, is if the choices are warmth and invitation to be who you are and be with us versus you can only come do this thing with the family if you perform at this level, well, that could lead to never seeing them. And that's heartbreaking, again, for family members we actually care about, right? So there's this idea of how do we create this warmth and welcome? That is one of the strongest reasons why I think personal choice remains at the center of the reform movement. And again, I'm only owning it for our movement because I don't want to speak on behalf of B'nai Jeshurun anymore, no longer there, but this idea that we are keeping more people involved and included than we would if we said, this is the box, fit into it, or choose a different place. Joni.
Hi, Dara. I'm very happy to see you. It's wonderful to see you. And you're right next to Dave on my screen, which is like so sweet. I think my question, I heard Dara Horn today, and you know her new book and how provocative it is. And so between what you're offering and what Dara is saying, I think fundamentally the question for me is, how does my synagogue not be a Unitarian, really nice place? Because I can just imagine you as the rabbi, and I go and I hear you and it's like, yeah, sure, I want to be in this community. So if we need to move away from the Jewish experience as the Shoah and a reaction to the Shoah, and we need to figure out a way to be in the world and connect it with the world, I guess my question is then, what is the basic, if somebody said, you know, you're really nice, but the Unitarians are nice and it's the same price. Thank you. Thank you, Dara.
Ah, beautiful, beautiful. Right. So it's great too, because I feel like there is sometimes this idea, and we don't even need to go as far as the Unitarians, like anyone who's who is a non-Orthodox synagogue, Reconstructionist, Reform, Conservative, what are the defining features anymore of all of our synagogues, aside from, I really liked the rabbi, so I stuck with her. It was the one in LA, if you remember traffic, right? Most of our people come from 8 traffic lights away. That's why they chose us initially. And then if they stick around, it's because we had more resonance for them. So beyond convenience or charismatic personality, what is going to define the synagogue apart from other traditions or apart from other communities that would give us a sense of specificity, of particularism? And Joni, the only thing I would just add is that because ultimately, if we don't have a specificity to us, we will lose us. And there is something that is so important about both the particularities of B'nai Jeshurun, of Isaiah, like we're talking, mergers are happening all over. I don't want to lose Isaiah's unique nature. But then it's also just the larger existential fear of the Jews. If we are not going to be specific and particular, and if we are not going to mandate, are we contributing to the ever-present ghost of assimilation, which continues to sort of haunt us? And then what happens? So I expanded what Joni said a little bit, with permission. Judith, I see your hand.
Hi, Dara.
Hello.
You taught me that when you were at BJ, you talked about choice and how we could shape it. And I think choice is a really interesting word, because once you have a sense that you can choose certain things, you're also more open to listening to what is present in order to grab that. It's almost like clay where it can be shaped. And I think it doesn't mean losing Judaism. I think it means deepening Judaism, especially if it's done with you, with Dave, with our rabbis, with others who can help frame and shape it.
Beautiful. So Judith, you give the most optimistic outlook, and which is why I love being in the tradition I am, which is in partnership with community and clergy. The deep dive into choice can lead to something so profound, so anchoring, that it will lift up an individual and possibly sustain a whole community. And you know, the flip side, and I'll show you a quote later from an article that was written like 11 years ago and it still captures my attention, is that it also provides cover for a very shallow performance of Judaism. And that coexists with like the people in my community, as I'm sure in yours, your own story, who have just so appreciated being told, you guide us, you tell us what's meaningful for you, and we'll help you find a way to deepen that connection. Also allows so many members of my community, not with malice, but just with a sense of like, it's like I said, we're joining because we don't have to do that much, right, Rabbi? You won't be judgy if I eat bacon wrapped shrimp, whatever. That's not why any of us went into the business of joining a community or being a rabbi, but that is right next to personal choice, which allows us to sort of say, how do we stay aware of that, even as it doesn't necessarily diminish what Judith was saying. Okay, I see Marlene and Eleanor. Oh, and Jenny.
Hi, Dara. It's great to see you. But I think the issue of choice has become even more important to me lately. I mean, for me, I came from a non-religious background with very little other than, you know, kind of meals together experience. And so when I had to sort of figure out, like, well, what did I want to take from the tradition and what didn't I want to take? I mean, even when you were here, I remember we worked on, I remember having a Hebrew name because I didn't have one. But I was going to say recently, my dad passed recently and no one in my family would really sit shiva or do Kaddish. And I knew I wanted to do something, but I wasn't quite sure. And having the choice to have that discussion at BJ and have it with Felicia and Rolly and figuring out, well, what is the path for me? What do I want to take? And what's not where I want to go was so important during this period right now, dealing with mourning, dealing with grief, dealing with loss. And I wouldn't have gotten that outside of choosing to be part of a Jewish community. It wouldn't have happened. Yeah. So I really value it even more now.
Yeah, again, another great story that shows that for those who are in relationship with community and with clergy, those moments are transformative. And just to speak to Shiva for just a quick moment, again, I don't know how many people came from California, if I ever spent time there, but I got here 15 years ago from BJ, where everyone, I mean, not everyone, Marlene, but like, a lot of people did the full Shiva. That was what was expected. Got here, people are like, no, Rabbi, we do about 3 days. That's what LA Jews do, 3 days. And I was like, well, which 3 days? Like, why 3 days? But I can tell you, it's not that often that people want to engage in a conversation in the midst of their grief, where maybe they're open, but it's also like not the ideal time to try to sort of sit with them and explain why welcoming in the community for ritual would be so meaningful. So I think, again, it really speaks to these two pieces of where personal choice works best. We may uncover a few more. Eleanor, go ahead.
Hi, Dara. Hi. It's so nice to see you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Well, when I first heard the topic, I said, that doesn't sound too interesting. Sitting here, the first thing I thought was, I never thought about personal choice. It shows how spoiled I am. I had such a free life in the world. I don't know about my home, if that was as free a life as I had outside. But, you know, having grown up in a Holocaust survivor family, I think the concept of people who didn't have choice was always hanging over me for my whole life, I think, till today. So, you know, even in the pandemic, every day I thought about the Holocaust, like complaining about wearing a mask. You know, people lived in a sewer. They didn't have any choice. I think now in the world I'm living in, that we're living in, I still have a lot of choice, but there's fear in the air for other people's choice, for our country, deep fear. So I don't know if I gave a dark view or a light view or a spoiled view.
Yeah. Well, and again, I think when we have grown up in the water, like a fish in the water, we don't know we're in water. It just is, right? The environment that we're in is the most normal one. And sometimes what happens is we get shaken up a little bit to realize where we actually are. I was thinking again about this sort of national struggle we're having right now, where there are still optimistic people, and I'd like to believe I'm one of them, that believe that we can be a nation united by belief, by practice, by some sort of shared dream of what we all agree we are sometimes working towards. But in the midst of that are massive discussions about personal choice. And I'm not sure that the nation is handling it any better than anyone else is we know that we have to surrender part of our choice in order to be part of something bigger. And yet at the same time, we can make as Jews very specific choices as to which communities we would like to be a part of, whereas this is the nation that we are all living in. Although in California, I would say there's still that like secessionism, like, no, we're just gonna go do it our own way. But there is that moment, of how do we find a balance? And that's where I'm always intrigued about what we can learn from the Jewish tradition, where we have been wrestling for, a couple generations at least, with so much choice is being given now, while we also try to say to people, you're looking to be a part of something bigger, something that will sustain you, something that will energize you, something that will give you meaning and purpose. That's not going to come just by you saying, here's what I want. It's actually going to come in relationship with others, and more importantly, and I would argue, in service to others. That's for me at least. But okay. But thank you, Eleanor. It's not too dark. Those are good. Jenny, please.
Hi, Dara. So this is really interesting. It just reminded me of a little bit of discomfort that happens for me twice a year, because my siblings, my brother and sister belong to a Reform synagogue in another state. And when our parents' yard sites come around, I observe their Hebrew yard site, and my brother and sister observe our parents' secular yard site. So it's a little bit of sadness for me that I'm never on the same page with my siblings. They're not with me emotionally on the Hebrew yard site of our parents. And sure, I'm with them emotionally on the secular yard site date, but I don't want to do it twice. So sometimes I sort of wish that their synagogue had stuck with the tradition. Like, was it that important to separate them from their family members who might have made a different choice to be more traditional in that way?
Yeah, Jenny, great example. And we're definitely contributing to that problem, because when somebody passes away at Isaiah, we say, do you want choice? Do you want to remember them on the Hebrew date or the secular date? And almost 90% of the people since I've been here choose the secular date. That's what they're familiar. But your story really indicates that people are still members of a biological family with what used to be a shared understanding of, this is the day where even if we're not in the same village or shtetl anymore, we're all going to remember our mother's yard site. But now we're doing it in separate ways. I think it's a very evocative story. And less political than when the Reform movement decided to acknowledge patrilineal descent, which was, if your father is Jewish, we, the Reform movement, fully acknowledge you as Jewish. You do not need to convert. You do not need to immerse. And that felt very divisive in the Jewish community, internationally as well. But it felt very important to the Reform movement at the time. But this is a much more relevant day-to-day, still happening, which again is that's what Karen was speaking to a little bit of, how do we keep families together even as things are pulling us apart? Geography being one of them.
Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. Karen, your hand is back up. Yes. And then I see Penelope, and then I'm going to take us to our first potential screen share. Okay, Karen, go ahead.
So here's another choice thing is when someone brought up about a yard site, it just reminded me my very close dear friend, her 25-year-old son died. And they're Jewish, but she didn't go to synagogue. So I immediately called Rabbi Braver, and in tears, like I am now. The yard site's coming up this summer. Anyway, he said, well, you can say Kaddish for him. You can do that. And he gave me like an amount of time and everything like that. And I called my friend, whose name is Karen, and I asked her, I said, would that help? And she just broke down. And she was so grateful, and her husband was so grateful. And I just think that even though Rabbi Braver is conservative, I think that's a very nice, open way of dealing. And it just really helped all of us out. So yeah, I like choice.
Yeah. And to have, and again, this is the great responsibility of those of us who go into the clergy is people do come in the non-Orthodox traditions, usually not with like a halachic, like it's not the same as I think what Orthodox rabbis are faced with, but like this is a liberal halachic debate. Like, can I say Kaddish for my friend's son? And so in that place of judgment, how do we both acknowledge the Jewish tradition, be a mediator between the person and the tradition, and again, this is a great example, like compassionate, loving, embracing. Of course, Alex did exactly what, right? I would agree. And at the same time, what if you had said, what if the friend Karen was a member of B'nai Jeshurun but said, like, I can't say it. Would Alex have pushed her in the moment to say, I know it feels heartbreaking, but I need you to come, right? And those are those touch moments where when we become truly individuals, when we're not a community, but we actually are made up of hundreds of thousands of individuals, each with their own story, each with their own background, who your grandparents were, who your parents were, who you married, who your kids are, that we're trying to make both individual assessments, which is like the most important conversations you can be having, but let's admit are like time consuming. And probably how many members are at B'nai Jeshurun now? How do you get to every single person to make sure their spiritual plan is in place? But also saying, but wait, there was wisdom in rules that applied to everyone, that held everyone. So if you didn't know where to go, if you didn't have a relationship with clergy, if you weren't sure what to do, we caught you because there was an understood, agreed upon set of rituals, whether you loved it or not. And I think that's part of our tension as well. So again, I really appreciate all of the stories because this is the day-to-day. This is why I find it such a compelling conversation is day-to-day, this is what Judaism, I feel like, looks like and feels like, is saying to the tradition, I'd like you to meet these amazing congregants of mine and their extended family members. Tradition, you might not have seen them before. They don't come to synagogue that often. Here they are, right? And here are my beloved congregants. In your moments of joy and of grief and of confusion and loss and frustration, I want to reintroduce you to a tradition that you might not know, and I have about half an hour to do it. Right? And how do we make those moments matter so that maybe somebody comes back again and gives us more time and then joins and engages? Because that's really the end goal, I think, for informed choice was not, you should feel really good in the moment. That's our end goal. Our end goal is we want you to feel so connected to Judaism and Jewish identity that your life has meaning and you are anchored when you are feeling unstable. And this tradition will continue because there are enough of us who are holding it up and teaching it. And at some point, it just wasn't clear anymore that mandated commandedness was going to take care of all of that we needed something a little, I don't know, different is a weird word, but we needed something else to add to the commandedness. So, okay, Penelope and then Ellen, and then I promise I'm going to share my screen. Okay, Penelope, go ahead.
Hi, Dara, it's Penny. I'm so happy to see you. And as you know, I'm a LA born and raised congregant. But what I was really, well, I'll just tell you what happened. So when my father died, I was in New York, and so I flew home, and my brother, who didn't want to do anything, I think I must have looked so sad and so horrible. He just said, okay, do whatever you want. But what I thought was so interesting is my friends there, well, what can I say? I really missed BJ when my father died, because my friends in LA, though they belonged to a very progressive Reform synagogue, they didn't know what to do. I had to tell them what to do, which didn't make my morning so great. Anyway, we did get through that, and no one stayed for a week. Everyone left like the day after the funeral. So there I was. Luckily, Sharon came and did a shiva for me and my husband. But my point is that I didn't, and what I realized was how lucky I am to be in a community that shares, where I learned about the Jewish way of doing it. So then I came home, and then there was a discussion, should I go to Shiva's morning minyan every morning? I didn't want to go to morning minyan. I wanted to go to the gym. And so a friend of mine suggested I read this book by a Rabbi Olitsky, and I can't tell you exactly the name, but it has something about a Jewish way of mourning, or some
Jewish way of death and mourning.
That's his book? That's
I
it?
think so.
Let's get, okay, thank you, Jenny. See, BJ does it again. And I was reading it, and I thought, you know, if I read one page each day, I will feel like I've done something without having to go to services. And that's what I did. For 11 months, I read one page of Torah. There was a piece of Torah, and then a piece of discussion, and then some really nice, sweet words at the end, every page. And then I realized that when the 11 months were over and I was supposed to stop saying Kaddish, I didn't want to do that either, because I felt that was the last connection to my dad. So I have to say that you were so nice during that time to me. And I really appreciate talking to you about it. And they're really lucky to have you. And I know exactly where the 5 lights are and where your synagogue is.
Yes, yeah. So Penny, thank you. And I mean, again, sometimes stories influence other stories, but I think there is something real about when we want ritual in the Jewish tradition to be fixed, or when it matters most to feel inclusive, and death and mourning is a big piece. Especially if you've lived your entire life non-traditional, secular, assimilated. We get calls all the time, you can imagine, as I'm sure the BJ rabbis do, from people who say, you're just the closest synagogue, we've never belonged, but I don't know who to turn to. You know, we need a rabbi for a funeral. And then it's, so I think that it's a really, again, it's a great example of the moment where it really does matter. Informed choice, personal choice, does impact how we grieve, how we mourn, how others can join us or not. You know, more so than perhaps like, what are we going to agree on for the deli platter, and like, what's it going to include? Which, by the way, again, in a Reform synagogue is still an ongoing discussion of, but I joined a Reform synagogue so that I could eat whatever I wanted and not feel bad. And others who say it's fundamentally, it's still a synagogue. Right? Shouldn't you have some parameters over if the cheese and the meat are on the same deli platter? This is where we've run into it before. Okay, Ellen, go ahead. And then I'm going to move it just quickly to an excerpt from this article. Go ahead, Ellen.
Okay, thank you, Dara. So good to see you also. Miss all the Marshall Meyer Fellows. We get so attached to you folks, and then you move on, but I'm glad you're having a good time in LA. So I'll try to make it fast. I did comment in the chat about how there are many Jews who were raised maybe Jewish, people I know certainly, and family, who feel like they just run away. It's all rules and shoulds. and they don't want any part of it, and they reject like the whole Jewish thing because they don't want part of it. So last year, just at this time, in fact, I just did yahrzeit. My first cousin my age passed away very suddenly of a brain aneurysm, totally unexpectedly. And we were close, but we had lived in different places and we weren't always together. And she had a very, very strong friendship group. And one of her friends was her attorney, and one was her healthcare proxy. She had assigned all the roles that she would need because she was a widow to her friends. And when she died, she was living in New York, but she died in Florida. And her friend happened to be visiting, who was her healthcare proxy. So he turned out to make all the decisions. And she was not religious, but she always depended on me. I said the yahrzeit for her father and mother every year. And she kind of said, Ellen, you take care of the Jewish stuff for me. You know, it's not my thing. But she had not left a will saying what she wanted. And so her friend made the decisions, and it really, you know, it broke my heart because I wanted her, when she died, to have tahara, to have her body cleansed. I found that a very cleansing, wonderful practice. When my parents died and we had it, the Plaza Memorial take care of that, and the BJ rabbis did their funeral service, and it was very nurturing to me to have that happen. So that was rejected by the Friends control group. And then they decided to have her cremated because, again, she never said anything. And I was begging them not to have it cremated because I feel very strongly about that. But, you know, I didn't have the legal wherewithal, and it's, and nobody else felt, even though they were all, this group was all born Jewish, none of them felt that urgency. It was not something that was part of them. So this was a very traumatic situation for me, not only losing my cousin, but kind of losing what I felt should be the observation that she had. And, you know, I did tell him this year that there was the yahrzeit, but everybody said, well, thanks, but we don't do that. So it's left me with this feeling, yes, people should have the freedom, but you know, what boundaries do you draw when it's so amorphous, when you have some people who feel so strongly about these traditions and rituals, and others who say, what's the big deal? No big deal about it, you know, don't see what's important about it. So I think that what came out before, somebody was talking about, you know, observing the yahrzeit date and observing the secular state, how family members, you know, the same with my father-in-law. My husband and I were the only ones who really felt my father-in-law should have a Jewish funeral. Nobody else felt that. So where does that, you know, I guess it's a question that's just going to stay open.
Yeah. But no, thank you, Ellen, for sharing that. And I think it's an interesting focal point to think about the end of our lives, both because how could we not think that regardless of however we spent the duration of our life, in those final moments when we are dying, in some way that has a lot of power and a lot of definitional certainty. Can we do the funeral right? Can we do Shiva because it puts an end to a chapter of an entire life that lifts up honor and tradition? It's what their parents or their great-grandparents would have wanted. And it's the one thing that maybe can sort of hold an otherwise a life of saying, look, we weren't, this wasn't, Ellen, not your words, but I would just say for a lot of our members sometimes, like, well, I'm not such a good Jew, Rabbi. I'm actually a bad Jew, right? There's sometimes like a flexibility with this language. But when death comes, there is a reverence for our own perhaps mortality and for a sense of we don't know what comes next. And so even if we just started there to say, what could we all agree one would do as a member of a particular synagogue, or one would do as a member of the Jewish people? In part because I think our gut says still, this is a really important moment. So let me pause for 1 second, just to sort of recap again why I think this question of personal choice or informed choice or just choice within a larger movement feels so relevant still. This goes back to this sort of Unitarian question. I think one is we're still struggling with what does it mean to be a Reform Jew, a conservative Jew, a post-denominational Jew. I don't think that we've settled out still on definitions. And in some ways, there are people who are very invested in making sure that every stream still has its place. And therefore, one of the most pressing challenges for the Reform movement is you who took up personal choice and said this was a sort of a mission statement of who we are. Is it still important that it stays at the center of Reform identity, or has that time passed and something else needs to go into the center of Reform identity and Reform practice? Another is to say, there's no better time to lift up personal choice because the whole world is moving towards choice and individuality and personal autonomy. And so this is exactly the right time to show that religion is flexible and nimble and responsive in a way that, again, people still have an impression that religion says you're welcome or you're not. The other thing I think that is still true, and at least it's true for me, I'm 45 and I grew up in a Holocaust sort of identified family, is I think there's still like a voice over the shoulder that says assimilation is still coming after the remaining Jews, not anti-Semitism, I want to be clear, assimilation. There aren't so many of us left. And if we do not lock down who we are and how we practice, every generation that practices less is a generation lost by our own doing, not by the enemy's. And so how should a synagogue or how should a movement be shoring up its beliefs and its practices so that we prevent this fear of assimilation? And again, I think there's two ways to look at that. One is maybe more and more people are checking none on their NONE, on their like, how do you identify in terms of religion? I'm sure we all have people in our families, and Ellen's story in particular, just the more recent one, is like people in our family were like, it's not so important how we do these things. It's not necessarily assimilationist, but just we're not as sticky as we used to be with our people. But the other is, are we missing the point, which is that over the last many generations, Judaism has sustained itself through all of the pressures of modern society because we gave people individual choice. It's actually the opposite. We shouldn't be afraid of it. We should be embracing it and saying thank you to it. Because as a result of saying, tradition, I'd like you to meet people. People, I'd like you to meet tradition. You guys should get to know each other, right? Let's have a conversation. All sorts of people have been brought back to the table that otherwise would have felt locked out. And that is actually where we need to keep heading. And when we're not clear on what is going to create Jewish sustainability, commandedness, high bars to entry, or personal choice, creativity, independence, I think there's sort of a dualistic war between the two. How much personal choice can you give before it's too much, or how much commandedness can you give before people walk away? But I think at the core of it, and that's where I'll show you this first critique of an article that I found, is we are looking to sustain and lift up the most vibrant, meaningful, healing, dynamic form of Judaism that we all know and love. We wouldn't be on this call if we didn't love our Judaism. How do we make sure that future generations get it as well? I think that's what our driving force is. And so how do we balance these sort of opposing forces? So, okay, let me just let in, there are a few people in the waiting room. Okay, so Leon Morris, still an amazing rabbi, who has written probably many things since this article, but he wrote this amazing article that I found online, which is called Reform Judaism Must Move Beyond Personal Choice. It's such a great title. And it was from 2011. I still think it's an amazing article. And his argument, in short, and I'm going to show you two excerpts from the article in a minute, basically says, in order to revitalize or restabilize the reform movement, personal choice has to come out of the limelight, stop referring to it as like the beloved child of, you know, the reform movement, and get back to text study and observance that we all can agree to, and a renewed commitment to traditional modes of belonging and practicing. And he says, and as you're thinking ahead, this was 10 years ago, you're going to need to recapture these things. That is what is going to get you to your end goal of a Judaism that is meaningful, that is attractive, that holds people in, that does what it's supposed to do. So here, let me show you the first quote. Share screen, document. Okay. So I call this first quote, seduction, convenience, relativism. All right, now I'm doing this a little tongue in cheek. I love Leon, and I think it's a great article. So, but I want to show you, like, again, it's a polemical article on purpose. It's supposed to make people think about how informed or personal choice might lead us astray. So hopefully everyone can see it. I tried to make it nice and big. Oops, that's the second quote. You're not supposed to see that yet. Great, here we go. Personal choice, he argues, is a seductive motto because it can confer a seemingly ideological veneer upon the most haphazard and unreflective religious decision. Convenience can easily be masked as commitment. In addition, personal choice undermines the notion of standards of any sort, making anything defensible and everything an equally valid choice. It is noteworthy that even the official standards of the reform movement itself are routinely disregarded because personal autonomy trumps them. Volumes of thoughtful responsa and guides to Jewish practice, mostly unknown to reform lay people and too seldom consulted by the rabbis, gather dust in libraries because such literature is often at odds with a reform Judaism for which personal choice is the central value. So I will drop that into, so I can take off the screen share. Hold on one second, and that way it can be there. So there you go. Okay. So let's just start with just making sure that the quote made sense. Anyone want to sort of volunteer? How does personal choice potentially cover up spiritual laziness? What does that premise mean to you? Like, is that even believable that it can do that? In your experience, Pam, I see your hand up.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think somewhere I would have put also ignorance, and this is not to disparage anyone. I mean, I think we're all trying to be the best Jews that we can be, whatever label you want to put in front of that. But to me, it's frustrating that, you know, people, and I've seen this, like successive generations, it seems, are more and more ignorant of what they're supposedly choosing. And I don't think you can choose unless you're informed what you're choosing. The people who started Reform Judaism way back in the day were raised Orthodox. They knew what they were giving up, but somehow that the reasons didn't get passed on as much as the practice. So I totally agree with this.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Yeah, and I think, you know, to be a heretic in the good old days meant you actually had to know what you were rebelling against. And now I feel like we can sort of enter and just say, based on my knowledge of however I got it, I don't want to do Shabbat. I don't want to keep kashrut. I don't want to observe Shavuot for 2 days. And it's not based on a deep sense of learning. And you're right, in the 1800s, that they were breaking away from an orthodoxy that was part of their lives. Eleanor mentioned she grew up in a family, like an observed, right? We all have families of origin that may have raised us with tradition that we at least then took a step away from if we made different choices. But in every generation that steps away, what is the base of knowledge? Karen, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, that is a really complicated statement, because when I think about going to morning minyan, going to fill-in, going to afternoon minyan, and then dealing with work and making dinner for my family and dealing with work and holidays that take place when you don't have time off. It's, you know, it's like you for me, it's like I do the best I can. And I like that if I'm not, then nobody's gonna wiggle their finger at me and go, shame, shame, shame on you. You're not a good Jew because you didn't go. But then I do have the feeling on the inside that I'm there at morning minyan or evening minyan, because if someone wants to say Kaddish, they can. And that feels not like, oh, look at me, I'm here and doing that. It's not because of that, but it's like, it's a nice tight group. And I really, that means something. But then I'm also dealing with life, you know? I mean, I'm still at work now. So it's like phasing this stuff in. So, you know, and I'm in San Francisco, and God knows we're all reform out here and everything else. So
yep, I hear it. Good. These are all, this is like what I love about this. When we give ourselves permission to dive into it, it can be both and. Here are the two examples that I had written down in my notes. The first is, thank God we allow for people to sort of wake up one day and make an assessment of their tradition, because and again, it may not always be for the best reasons, but we get them to 13-year-olds growing up in Los Angeles, oftentimes whose parents have not joined a synagogue. This may happen in New York or San Francisco as well. Sometimes look around and all their friends are having bat mitzvahs, and they wake up one day and they say to their parents, like, I want one of those too. And for the parents who actually then enter the synagogue and say, we're not looking just to throw them a party. We actually, could we sign them up for religious school? Could we do this thing at the last minute? Like, that's a great moment where you didn't have to have a huge base of knowledge. You just wanted to pivot. And the answer is, we may not be able to get you a date this year, but we'll get you one for when she's 14 and we can do this, like, join us. On the other hand, this is another example of death and funerals that for me is also really, and I asked Felicia Saul this the other day too, like, LA funerals at times are a little kooky. So like, is it appropriate if a family says, what would be most meaningful, Rabbi, is as people are entering and sitting down, we'd love to play music that the deceased loved. And then the music you hear is like R&B or rap. And it's right. And so you're like, oh, that's okay. That is also choice. And that, wow, nothing in my upbringing would say that you should play rap music in a memorial chapel as people are entering. And yet I gave that permission because we were trying to be, right? I didn't ask the right questions. So there are moments where, and I don't want this to be like the test of I'll know it when I see it, because that also feels haphazard. But something in this relationship between people and tradition, between people and their clergy, does seem to be really important as we think about personal choice. Does it feel safer, or does it feel like more of a tool that will get us to strong Jewish identity and strong Jewish practice when we know that people are making the choices in relationship to someone else, versus independently on my own, I've decided I like whatever I like, and that doesn't comport with Judaism, so I'm just not going to do it. So just these, again, I always like playing with when are we going to know that we're doing personal choice in the way that serves the people and the individuals for the long haul. Second quote I want to show you. And again, these are all meant, he wrote it, I think, in a really healthy, provocative way. So let me pull up the second quote again with his argument. Hold on, share screen. That we have to be really careful with personal choice being at the center of Jewish identity. I like this one in particular. So I call this one a little bit facetiously, me, but I'm kind of lonely. So he writes, additionally, personal choice diminishes the significant role of the larger community. Many of us affiliate with religious institutions out of a desire to overcome a sense of isolated individualism. People increasingly are looking to communities of faith in order to be part of something larger than themselves. Many of us are even willing to expand our own practices or adapt our own proclivities in order to participate within a larger community that gives us meaning and purpose. We understand that belonging comes with expectations and responsibilities that emerge from those relationships that help us to mark time, to celebrate, and to give to others. And any forward-looking religious movement must come to terms with the fact that the religious community is experiencing the most growth and the greatest dynamism today are those that make real demands upon its members. So I'm going to grab that again. I'll put it in the chat box. But think on that for a second. And there it is. Okay, hopefully all that got transplanted. Okay, so just to make sure that it makes sense again from the reading, can someone volunteer? How, according to Leon, how does personal choice work against our desire to be part of something bigger than ourselves? Can you think of an example, or can you think of a moment where we say we want to be part of something bigger, but our personal choice is getting in the way? Eleanor, go ahead.
It's such a moment-to-moment question. The first thing that jumped into my mind is I, like very many people here, have survived the pandemic by being at BJ morning, afternoon, evening, just to be together. And that led me to choose to pray a lot. That's a big struggle. So often, I'm quite honest with all of you. After all, I've been together with you so much for so many years. I think that my mind wanders, and I don't want to, so the personal choice is like, am I going to stay for the second Kaddish? Am I going to read the Psalm of the day? Do I need Musaf after all? It's like, I'm done after Torah. But I do stay, I choose to stay, because I guess one of the benefits of growing older is to defer your wants and needs, sometimes forever. You know, certainly I can defer through the second Kaddish, but I think it comes up very commonly in the day in Jewish life.
Beautiful. I love the prayer example too, because again, I love Isaac. I'm here for life, guys. So I just want to say, if I've told you funny stories, it's totally out of love. I am dedicated to these people in this community. But I will tell you that guests will come to our bat mitzvah service and they'll be like, Rabbi, this is like a 3-hour service, right? I'm like, no, we're Reformed. It's like 90 minutes in and out. You're good. Like, it's like there's a sense of prayer is enduring when you like exactly what you said. Like, there's so many different parts to a traditional prayer service. Even if the music is great and the drasha is amazing, you're there for 9 to 12. And how does that, like, I'm uncomfortable, I'm hungry, but I still need to be here. That's a great wrestling moment, because ultimately, Eleanor, what Leon would argue and what many others would suggest is by enduring and being in service to the community, even if you're like, I'm one of 300 people here, what does it even matter? Something about your life transforms, and we are less isolated. We are less adrift because we have understood through practice and obligation that we are not just an individual, but we are part of something majestic, and something that will outlive us even. And that sense even of touching eternity by just being part of something actually can be incredibly sustaining. So prayer is a great example. I see Karen, I see Harriet who's come in, Shira.
The prayer just like really hit something for me, because when I'm doing like the silent Amidah, I may not be doing the prayer. I might just be going off into my own personal space to think and pray about something else, do a little mindfulness or different type of meditation. And that's pulling away from a lot of this stuff. And so I had a little time wrestling with that, but a rabbi announced and gave permission to do that. And I just feel so, ooh, that's kind of cool, just to kind of have a private talk with God at that time. It's very, yeah. So I think is that kind of a little bit what he's talking about? Okay.
I mean, so a lot of it is about, and again, in the pandemic, it's like a great tension. It's about showing up, right? A lot of the not practicing and the not doing is because, you said it best, Karen, like we're busy people. We got lives, we got families, there's like traffic sometimes, or, you know, like there's all sorts of stuff. And so if the synagogue as the organizing hub of the Jewish community, now on Zoom makes it a lot easier, but it is meant to say, come in to practice with others, because we can't do the Kaddish without you, because we can't learn, right? This is like the most amazing thing, is that people oftentimes seek out Torah study because they want to learn something for themselves, but it's actually the group and the way that all the brains and minds and hearts and souls work together in chavruta and in partnership that allow you to come to this great revelation about your own life that you never would have seen before. That doesn't often happen on your own. I mean, again, with full respect to the book that someone was talking about, the meditation book of prayer and of mourning, but almost always Torah studies dynamism is felt because you are choosing to be a part of something bigger, but you got to show up in order to feel it. Okay, Harriet, and then Shira.
So on the showing up phase, you know, all these months of showing up on Zoom, and missing so much being in person, and not even remembering how much I appreciated it till it opened up again. It was so huge to be able to show up. And then we closed down again last month for 3 or 4 weeks. And I was bereft that we weren't open. And as soon as I could go back, I ran down there to be back, because showing up feels so much different now than it did before.
Yeah. Now, this is also true for our members, who I would call like the Shabbat regulars, the Torah study regulars, the super volunteers. Like, when you have already reached the point where your synagogue is a second home, and these are your second family, it's a no-brainer, right? These are your people. They call, you answer. And again, I would say, out of the 53 screens that are here, I don't even know how many of us feel like maybe I would be a fringe person, right? Maybe all 53 of us are in, which is also part of the challenge. No, Harriet's like, I'm not in. but there is this other subset of people that we are related to, that we know about, who don't yet feel in. And I think, again, one of the greatest challenges of how to deploy personal choice is when we want to say to those people who don't yet realize how sustaining and reinvigorating and healing a synagogue and a Jewish community and tradition can be, how do we get you in the door, in the metaphoric door, long enough for you to feel and see and understand? And so when is personal choice deployed in a really healthy way that says, I'm going to bend the tradition, I'm going to move, I'm going to be flexible so that you are here, versus I just made it permissible for you to do nothing and you're not going to feel at all like bad about it. No, you're not, even in like the most important moment, you're going to be like, nah, it's fine. My rabbi said I shouldn't feel bad. Like, I'm terrified that somebody's using me as an excuse. No, it's okay. Dara said, it's fine. It's fine. I'm a Reform Jew, right? No, participation. That's what we're, okay. Shira, go ahead.
Hello, thank you. Yeah, this is all, nothing's ever simple, right? We're a bunch of Jews, so we have many answers. But I love the ritual and the community that I feel with that, you know, but I like to like poke out on the sides a little too, you know. But I do struggle with this because, well, for one thing, I have a really good friend, somebody wrote in the chat, who, you know, totally turned her back on Judaism. And she'd never liked my Judaism, you know. She might like, you know, some of these big choice Judaisms, you know, and that would get her in, you know. And so I get that. And so I think that the reform or whatever has more choice. I almost think there's more pressure on the clergy to have to maintain whatever the Judaism boundaries are, you know, but that it's kind of cool that we have, I mean, we're all Jews, right? But we break it down into all these little, we got Reconstruction, we got Reform, we got, you know, but So you can find the piece that fits you. You know, where I moved, there isn't a place that fits me here where I live. That's why Zoom and BJ has been like a super gift. You know, I mean, I kept trying. I'd go places, you know, but it just didn't fit because I had both sides. I had what I called super light, you know, and super non-inclusive, right? So, I mean, it's already kind of worked out, and it's interesting. Yeah, because how do you like capture the attention of the people? That's what I always wonder. We have so many unaffiliated Jews where I live, and I don't know how you can capture the attention or capture my friends that aren't into it at all. I feel like, oh, you're missing so much, you know, but they're not, you know, I think they are, but that's also good for my humility and my keeping humble, because it's not, everybody doesn't see it like I see it. And so I love the choice, but it's not, all that choice isn't so great for me. You know, I also need more, but thank God we have more.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, you're right. And again, we always love that Jewish joke of like, you know, like 2 Jews, 3 opinions. We're like a multivocal. We like take such pride in, you know, like arguing and so like the question is, so like, why does it raise such tension or anxiety when we say to people like, so go make choices, go come, don't come? Like, there's always been Jews that didn't practice, that didn't affiliate, that didn't answer the call. And I think some of the anxiety, again, certainly held by clergy and the sort of community standards and the gatekeeping, but I think also by those who continue to worry. So I'm going to put up like a little straw man here of like, I still think we are, I said this earlier, haunted by the fear that if we make the wrong choices around permissibility, around creativity, around choice, that just give it another 10 years and you're going to see there's like 2 of us left. Even though we haven't actually seen that happen. We in this diaspora that we live in post-Holocaust, I haven't seen this Great Depression of Jewish practice. Arguably, you could say we've seen renaissances all over the United States and probably throughout the world. I'm just most familiar with our nation. And what is fueling it? And is, again, like we keep sort of putting out, here's what we can't do anymore. I think about interfaith marriage and how I grew up in the 80s. My father was the child of Holocaust survivors. He fully said to me, I probably told the story years ago at BJ, he said, if you ever marry a non-Jew, we're sitting Shiva. And then all these years later, I'm in college and he's like, you should just fall in love with whoever you want. And I was like, whoa, time out. What happened to that conversation on the couch? And you said Shiva. And he's like, did I say that? I don't know. A lot of my physician friends' kids are marrying non-Jews. They seem okay. That was his entire anecdote. It wasn't based on text or Torah or tradition. It was based on where was the Jewish community at and what felt normalized to him. And we went from, this is what you have to do to stay in, and me thinking, God forbid, I'm going to be kicked out, to, oh, there's permission and there's flexibility in a way that I couldn't have anticipated, and I'm still in. So that's my personal story, but in part. But I think we're always looking for what is going to give us security, that we still have a people, that we still have a tribe, that we still have an identity that will endure, protect us, support us. And at the same time, can we relax a little bit and look around with appreciation for where we are and actually how strong and dynamic and beautiful and inclusive, you know, we are as a result of all of these paths we've traveled. Okay, end of sermon. Patty, go ahead. Oh, but you're on mute, Patty. Yes, you know. Oh, you remuted yourself. It was like you double negatived.
I'm aware that we're beyond the 60 minutes. I'll try to say this succinctly. I'm delighted, Dara, that you mentioned interfaith just then, because it was sitting on my shoulder this whole hour, and I was trying to think of what was it I wanted to say. I'm a Jew by choice. I was a member of a Reconstructionist shul here in San Diego for 23 years. practicing with children and my husband, who was raised Reform. We found a community where I was welcome. We found a community where education was integral to everything. So I would urge everyone to think about the issue of Jews marrying non-Jews. The numbers are staggering. I have two sons married, well, one's engaged, one's married, neither to a Jew. They have no Jewish life at the moment. I'm not saying they never will, because this is what I'm saying. Just as your father evolved in his position over time, because the world shifted, he shifted with it. And it may be for my children, it may be something as simple as, you know what, maybe we really do need a Jewish education to give some foundational grounding to our kids. Who knows? But I would urge all communities, whatever the denomination, whatever the movement, educate, educate, educate. Offer things like this. Offer workshops on rituals of mourning and death, or let's discuss end of life situations. Because as people understand, and by the way, I went to Melton just before, I formally converted 8 years ago. And I did Melton first year before, the second year after. And I learned so much. Oh, who knew? This is why it's done. All I did was tag along with my family and just kind of, learn some things, but it's the education. And then guess what, folks? Maybe those people who are not affiliated, who are not born Jewish would say, there's really something here, something meaty, something that means something to my life. And therefore, I think my husband came back around a little bit more in practice as a result of me getting, converting formally and so on. Anyway, sorry, I went much longer than I intended, but those are my 2 cents plus.
Thank you. No, that's great. And Dave told me it was like 75 minutes. So we've still got like 3 minutes left for, I'm going to say your name wrong.
Yeah, you're good.
Rocio Torres. I see your hand up.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm not a member of BJ's. I'm a member of a Reform synagogue in New York City. And my choice, I'm also a Jew by choice, because late in life, I learned that my father was Jewish, but he was raised a Catholic, and just like me. So I had to convert because I was never raised a Jew. So I went to a Reform congregation which accepted me as who I am. And just to tell you that, yeah, you find meat. And I agree with Pam Hudson, who said that you have to be educated and you have to dig into Judaism to know the traditions yourself, because this is what I was longing for. And so, although it's not a very traditional one, but it was meat for me. I was there enjoying Judaism as I choose to have it. I celebrate Shabbat the way I can celebrate Shabbat. And so to me, choice is really important to enjoy my Judaism. And thank you for having meetings like this.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you again. Beautiful. Thank you to everyone. Gail, were you putting your hand up or? Yes. Okay, Gail, I think you're going to get the last one and then I'm going to say thank you.
Oh, wow. I have a foot in the Reform movement and BJ, which is conservative-ish, and grew up in conservative and Holocaust. So I've sort of been in the gamut. And I think the way that I look at it is like trying to define a piece of art and say, okay, so these pieces are definitely modern and these pieces are definitely representational. But really the interesting things are where they overlap and where you have a conversation with your friends about, I don't know, what do you think of that? And that's what makes a community, is that you've had the discussions and you have the background education, so that you're not just saying, my 5-year-old could do that. I don't know why it's in a museum. So, the more that you're educated about your subject matter, the more that your choice seems permissible to me. Because if you have a choice, but really it's just the laziness track, then you're probably not going to have a very meaningful religious experience or community experience. So I think there's a lot of overlap, and I like the term post-denominational, but then there's problems with that too, because it does help to kind of know which movement it's a part of. You know, you're drawn to modernity or you're drawn to tradition, you know, so
beautiful.
That's my last word.
Thank you. So I want to be respectful of time, and Marcia, I'm going to see you. I know it's services, so I'm going to put you on hold. You're mine. But I just want to first of all say so much gratitude for B'nai Jeshurun putting this together. Formative experience of my life, being one of your fellows. And I still think about everything I've learned and put it to good work every day. So I hope you know there is a West Coast satellite along with ICAR and so many others where people are at. Josh Levine Grader's out here too. Yael's in La Jolla. We've got great people on the West Coast, so come visit. The second thing is, I would say my greatest hope is just that conversations like this both remind us of how lucky and privileged and blessed we are to be in community where we get to have these kinds of conversations, and where our hearts, minds, and souls are hopefully like lit up by just continually thinking about who are we in life? How do we make our choices? What is this beautiful thing called tradition and Jewish community? And if there is like energy for the people that are around you, I don't know. I feel like we're all kind of evangelical about our love of B'nai Jeshurun or Isaiah or whatever synagogues we're at. Like, just leave out the hope that you are also part of the great ambassadors of this tradition, and your own stories, however you arrived here, are worth sharing. Because there are so many ways that we arrive to these moments of feeling included and feeling seen. And Sarah, who said earlier, fringe here, you know, there's nothing wrong with the fringe, by the way, but always be curious about those who are sitting right outside. And what would it take to welcome them in and be curious about their experiences. And then I really believe the future of the Jews is looking good. And all of us are going to be a part of it. So with optimism and hope and good health, Dave, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you, everyone, for learning together this evening.